All right. Well, thank you for having me. So we're doing something a little bit different. We're going to break normally my 2 hour presentation into four parts here. So what I'll do is I'll run through the half-hour presentation today, and towards the end, at any point you can ask questions, obviously, but towards the end, we'll definitely field any questions that may have accumulated and give you an opportunity, and then we will touch on what we're going to be covering here in the final three sessions. Okay, so usually we all sit down for 2 hours and do this, but today we're just going to do the first half hour. So getting started, of course, I am a surveyor. I am a licensed professional surveyor here in Michigan, and I am a certified floodplain manager. About 12, well, going on 15 years ago, I became a specialist in FEMA flood zones, and they literally fly me all over the country now to educate. I've been teaching seminars in Alaska, Vermont, and a whole bunch of places in between. So, and it's all about FEMA flood zones, and it's all what I've learned here in Michigan. So it's really important. We are in a really good spot as realtors to help homeowners, and that is basically what a lot of this is all about. Okay, so that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Whether you're representing a buyer or a seller, it's important to understand that process that's about to occur, the whole process of helping a seller or helping a buyer purchase, that has to run as smoothly as possible, hopefully, because your entire profession is based on referrals. Okay, so we always want this experience to be as pleasant as possible. And if that word flood zone ever comes up through the process, and it usually does at the very last minute if it's going to come up at all, then very often you're going to have your buyers running for the doors. And it's very frightening. They basically will see all their visual goods floating away somewhere, just like this. And they don't want to load up all their valuables into a house and have this visual of all their goods floating away. So it's really important for us to make sure that we avoid that at all cost. Okay, we don't want the word flood zone coming up at the last minute. And so today what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about how to be proactive as a buyer's rep or a seller's rep. At what point do you really question the whole flood zone issue? And so if you are representing a seller, it's important to understand that our seller's disclosure does not ask the correct questions when we talk about flood zones. It only asks one question here in Michigan. It says, are you currently paying flood insurance? And that is not enough of a question. We need to ask more questions. So if you're representing a seller, you really do want to know, are we dealing with a house in a flood zone or close to a flood zone? Yes or no? Okay. And many times, you have to educate your seller that we want to be proactive. We want to take care of this problem. If it does exist, we want to take care of it before you get to that closing, before you get a buyer all ready to close, and at the 11th hour they're told the house they're about to purchase is in a flood zone. So it just makes sense as a seller's representative to try and take care of this problem ahead of time. And one thing to understand is if your seller is paying flood insurance, we kind of want to take care of that problem ahead of time, because your seller should be entitled to almost an entire year refunded back in flood insurance. And this could be thousands of dollars. So if we wait until the 11th hour, until we're right up against a closing, we ignore the fact that the property is in a flood zone, and now we have to do something in that 11th hour, many times your sellers will not get their refund back. So it's really important for us to take care of this as early as possible, especially if your seller is paying flood insurance. We do want to educate our clients. The most probably the most often thing that a person who owns a house in a flood zone, they would normally say to me after I get their house out, they would say, how come nobody ever told me I could do this? Okay, so many times people are paying flood insurance and they don't even know they have the option of possibly getting themselves out. Now if you're representing the buyer, it makes sense to go ahead and check this out ahead of time. So let's step back for a moment. In my last session, my fourth session, a week from Thursday, I'm going to exit out of my PowerPoint and I'm going to go into a screen where we can actually, it's a FEMA website, and we can actually look up properties ourselves. So that is basically what I'm telling you to do here. As part of being proactive, I want you, the realtors, to go and look up your properties when you go to list them or when you go to possibly make an offer or buy them. In fact, I want you to be so proactive. I want you to be more like my daughter. My daughter is a realtor, and she looks up properties before she even goes to show a property. She already knows and makes a note on the document, on the little the sheet, the listing, that they're going to go check out the house. She makes a note. We have a flood zone issue on this one. Okay, so it's important for you as the realtor representing a buyer to let your buyers know immediately. If they fall in love with the house, say, that would be the moment where you'd say, okay, I looked this one up and we may have a flood zone issue with it. So again, you want to do a little bit of investigative stuff before you go to show that house. You want to ask questions maybe of the listing agent, and you want to make sure that it's all worked right into your deal. If you're going to make an offer on a house, don't you think it affects the value of the house if it's in a flood zone? It absolutely devalues it greatly. Okay, so you want to make sure written right into your offer is the option of pulling out of the deal if we can't get the house out of a flood zone. Okay, we want a contingency there. And the other thing is, it's been happening more and more because flood insurance is becoming extremely costly. And that's something we're going to talk about because, uh, so basically, the legal aspect is when people pay flood insurance, there's new laws that have been passed, and those are pushed. They push the premiums up severely for people paying flood insurance now. So very often it's a deal breaker to the point where it actually prices people out of the house. Okay. So again, if you're representing that buyer, many times today, you're going to actually possibly have the house checked for the flood zone to see if we can remove it, maybe even before you spend the money on the inspection. Okay. So again, those are all really good questions to ask. We want to make sure you're being proactive more than anything when it comes to representing your buyers and your sellers. Okay. A few years ago, we actually found that this scenario right here, where it was a couple days before a closing, and a realtor called us and said, "Hey, we got an issue. My buyer's about to walk. Lenders forcing 2,200." And this was probably the first time I remember this happening. Might have been over 10 years ago, and it might have only happened a couple times a month. This scenario pretty much happens every day now. Okay, where they're all saying, "Oh my gosh, we got an issue. The buyer's about to walk away from the closing. They got to bring all this money." And so when it happened that first time, it was a Wednesday, and on Wednesday, the realtor called me and said, "Hey, is there a way we can get this house out of a flood zone? Is there anything you can do to help me?" By Thursday morning, we were out there. We were checking the house. By Thursday afternoon, we had the house out of a flood zone completely, and the closing actually occurred on Friday morning. So can we remove houses that quick? Yes, we can. This past weekend, I checked a house on Saturday, and we had them out of the flood zone by Monday. Okay, so it can happen really fast. And because,
Carol,
yes, you got a question?
yeah, I just want to jump in really quickly. What is the first step to potentially getting a home in a flood zone removed? Is that giving you a call?
Yes. Well, so let me explain, and it doesn't have to be me because there are definitely lots of surveyors out there. The one thing is, when you go to choose a surveyor, you want to make sure you ask them, is this something you normally do? Because many surveyors will just give you what's called an elevation certificate. So we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But more importantly, yes, you'd want to give a call. So if you don't learn anything else today, the one thing I want you to understand is when we look at these flood maps and you see a bunch of blue, we still don't know whether you're in a flood zone or not. And the reason is because the maps are extremely approximate. Okay, so the most important thing to understand is when you look at a flood map, you see blue. If the house that you're about to either sell or the house that your buyer's about to buy is anywhere near that blue, okay, potentially it could be in a flood zone. All right. And the lender can force flood insurance if you're anywhere near a flood zone line. So again, anytime you see blue anywhere near a house or through a house or blanketing a house, we really still don't know where the flood zone is. And so how do we figure that out? You have to call a surveyor. We have to go check it. And once I check it, then I'm going to be able to tell you, yes, I can get it out or not. And so a lot of times people would ask, well, what is the cost? Most of the time we charge about $200, a flat fee of $200 to go check the house. And then if I find that the house qualifies and you want me to move forward, usually it's an additional $600. And again, you can hire other surveyors. I'm really not sure what all their fees are. Okay. Any other questions? I'll move on then. So, so a few years ago, obviously I was just your average Joe surveyor doing surveying regular stuff. And I became, when I started doing these flood zone things, I became a superhero to my clients. And honestly, whether it's the people who are selling the houses, which is the realtors, or representing the buyers, or just somebody who's out there paying a ridiculous amount of flood insurance, okay? They all have gotten to the point where they can't believe we can get them out. And we basically saved the day. And again, we save the deals, okay? And you too can be the hero in the room if you pay attention and you learn about this flood zone stuff, because a lot of people don't understand, again, that they have options, okay? So what we're teaching you in everything that we're teaching you here today is basically FEMA comes to Michigan and they teach from above. They teach everybody how to serve the government, okay? What I'm teaching you is the total opposite. I'm teaching you how to serve the people, okay? And so it's a totally different twist on what you're going to hear from me versus what you hear from FEMA. FEMA is self-serving and they're basically wanting everyone to pay flood insurance, okay? And so again, this is like a 2-hour presentation that we're basically splitting into 4 parts. And throughout the 2-hour presentation or the 4-part presentation, we are covering all these topics. These are all the important ones. And the bottom 2 topics are actual laws that were written. And those are laws that pertain to FEMA flood zones. And they're federal laws and they came into effect in the last couple years. But on the top, the ones that we're really covering more today is flood zones specifically. What is a flood zone? And elevation certificates. And these things called LOMAs. Nobody even knew what a LOMA was a few years ago. So we're going to talk in detail about LOMAs. And that's something that you're going to know a whole lot more about in a few minutes. And then, of course, flood vents. And again, this will all be spread over the 4-day period that we're covering all the different topics, okay? The bottom 2 laws are big game changers, okay? So when we look at the United States today, you see all these red boxes. Everywhere we see a red box here is a county that got new flood maps since 2006. So FEMA started creating these new flood maps all over the country starting in 2006. In fact, anyone who's been in your profession for any length of time will probably have not remembered anything to do with flood zones or flood insurance prior to 2006. And the reason being was most of the time, lenders didn't force flood insurance, okay? So when we started doing these new maps, that's when you started seeing new flood insurance laws come out and new flood insurance requirements from your lenders, okay? So if you go back into all of the mortgages for the past 30 years, you would have seen a paragraph, and that paragraph was somewhere in the lender's mortgage. The paragraph was actually checked by the lender, and it says, you will not be required to pay flood insurance for the entire life of this loan. The last sentence says, unless FEMA redoes the flood maps, okay? So that clause is now kicking in because FEMA is redoing flood maps all over the country and all over Michigan. So you can see everywhere we're at right now, all around us, this whole area is pretty much in a flood zone. Okay, so very much of Michigan has now got new flood maps. Okay, right now we're in the area of Oakland County, Livingston County, Ingham County, Eaton County, all these areas all the way across. Everybody, now when we get over to Kent County, they don't have new flood maps yet. Okay, so Saginaw County does not have new flood maps yet. I need to actually update this because Lenawee County just got new flood maps. Okay, so really everybody who's got red has new flood maps. Why is that important? Because they are forcing flood insurance like never before. Okay, so it's important for you to understand that. Now, when we talk about educating us, okay, FEMA comes to Michigan and says anywhere it rains, it can flood. Okay, so we don't tell everyone that you aren't going to flood here in Michigan because that would be wrong. However, the likelihood of you flooding here in Michigan is very small compared to other areas of the country. In fact, in Michigan today, when somebody shows up in a flood zone, 85% of the time I can get them out, which is pretty darn good odds. Okay, so we don't tell people you can't, when you're in a flood zone, you're not gonna flood. Okay, so I just want to point something out here. This is actually a flood that occurred in 2013 in downtown Grand Rapids, and the windows here where the water is coming up, that is actually a second story window. This is the river walk out here, and this is where, you know, the water's up 22 to 24 feet that day. Okay, they actually told the business owners in these businesses to knock out those lower windows, to literally bust them out with a bat prior to the flood zone or flood coming up. And the reason that was asked of them, and it's real important for you to understand, and this will come up later in my later presentations. Actually, on the fourth day I do this, a week from Thursday, we're going to talk about flood vents. And that was the whole theory behind a flood vent, because this pressure builds up on the walls of a building. Okay, so we aren't saying that it doesn't flood in Michigan. It definitely floods. Okay, and here you can see that this bridge was designed for a 100-year flood. Okay, water was up literally 22 to 24 feet here that day. Okay, so it's real important to understand that, again, the bridges today, when we put new bridges in, they design bridges for floods. And in areas around where you guys sell houses, that's really important, because sometimes we have certain types of flood zones and they don't give me an elevation for that. Oh boy, I'm going to have problems because I have a dog that wants to go out. Anyways, I might have to run over and let him out. Sorry about that. I should have done this at my office. I just was afraid to travel up there. Okay, so anyways, the bridge itself, you can see the water is not washing over the bridge. They designed this bridge for a 100-year flood, obviously. And I always show this picture because I just think it's a silly picture. Somebody was stupid enough to go inside that building with the entire weight of the water pushing on the glass. And at any moment, that glass could have broken and those people would have been washed away. I just thought it was just the stupidest thing anybody could ever do. And obviously, you can see there's a fish swimming by. So the river was really up. Now, you see all these houses. This was a picture someone had obviously snapped from a helicopter that day. And these houses, if you were asked to sell one of these houses, I suspect you would have a difficult time. In fact, these people who own these houses right now, they probably are paying anywhere between $4,000 to $6,000 a year. Now, if they have a mortgage, remember, if they don't have a mortgage, they might not be paying flood insurance. And that is why it's important for us, the realtors, to look these things up. So if you were trying to sell a house like this and somebody was actually paying thousands of dollars a year for flood insurance, then you would have a difficult time. Now, the important thing to notice is these living spaces are truly above the floodwaters. So if these houses did not have a basement, if they had just an actual crawl space, let's say, and they were elevated on those crawls, I could literally take one of these houses and remove them from the high, I'm sorry, I could do an elevation certificate on these houses, and we would actually be able to take flood premiums from 4 to 6,000 a year down to 4 to 600 a year, just by installing some engineered flood vents and elevating mechanicals. So it's important for you guys to understand that, because we're going to talk about that in my third and fourth presentation next week, okay? But there are things we can do to help homeowners when they are in a flood zone, okay? And if I can't get them out, then maybe we can get those premiums way down. So I don't want to go to a complete, stop here, but if anyone has any questions, this would be a good time to ask. We are going to start winding down because we're approaching the 12:30 mark. And tomorrow, when we get into this, I want to tell you some of the, or not tomorrow, Thursday, when we get into this again with the other 3 sessions, I want to real quick touch on the things we're going to be touching on. We're going to talk about the history and why we're in this position we're in. That'd be the flood zones and how the maps where they ever come from. The fact that that these flood maps, when we revise them, many times they're not set in stone. We're going to talk about these LOMAs that I've been telling you about, Letter of Map Amendment. That's what it stands for. And we're going to talk about also how we can raise the ground and build houses out of flood zones, all right? So those are all options that are out there available to us as far as, removing somebody from a flood zone. And if we can't remove them, then maybe we can get their premiums way down. I do want to tell you one quick story. This one actually happened over in Livingston County on the Huron River. I had a gentleman who was a veteran. He was in a wheelchair. He was being forced to pay flood insurance. We came in there to check his home, and we found that the Huron River was really going to come up that high. It was going to be about 6 inches of water licking at this house. Again, he was being charged $4,200 a year for flood insurance. He was a veteran in a wheelchair, and he was going to lose his house, okay? He was falling behind in his payments really fast. So we told him, okay, all you got to do is install a few engineered flood vents in your foundation, raise your heating and cooling unit on the back of your house 1 foot, which he did. It was on the outside. He got his buddies to come in and put those vents in. He raised that heating and cooling. 2 weeks later, we came back. We completed an elevation certificate for him, and his premiums went from $4,200 down to $356 a year. So we were able to save the house. He's able to stay in his house. He's going to be able to live his dying day in the house, and he was thrilled. And this gentleman he almost lost his house. He found us just in the nick of time. Okay, so it's really important to understand there are things we can do, and we're going to talk a lot about ways to help homeowners and ways to check the maps along the way. Does anybody have any questions?
So Carol, I think we have a couple.
Okay.
What is the website to check an address?
Okay, we are going to cover that, but basically the very final day, and I don't know how many of you are going to be able to join us a week from Thursday is our last day. I usually exit out and go to it, and I show you how to look it up. And if we get through the questions quickly, I can jump over there and show you. But the easiest way is to go to my website and then click on the resources button. And the very first thing on the resources page is how to check a structure, okay? But I can jump over there and show you that in a minute if you'd like. What other questions do you have? Any?
What is flood zone X?
Okay, so we're going to cover that, and I think we cover that tomorrow a little bit because, again, this was only a half-hour presentation today, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that we didn't get through. But there's different classifications of flood zones, okay? We all talk about the 100-year flood zone, which is a 1% chance in any given year of flooding. And again, we'll cover all this in detail probably on Thursday. But the X zone would be a safe zone. That would be my house right here is in an X zone. I'm in a a 500-year plus flood zone. So that means my house is built high enough that the water will never come up this high to get to my house, but once every 500 years, which is called an X zone. We also have an X shaded zone, which is like the 100-year to the 500-year, okay? So the water is going to come into that X shaded area between 100 and 500 only once every 100 years, more than 100 years. Now, the 100-year flood zone that we talk about, it says that the water at least once every 100 years is going to come up to this elevation, okay? And if it gets to that elevation, then obviously we are having a flood, all right? Then that would be the actual AE zone or the A1 through A30 zone. And those are things we cover in the later presentation, okay? But the X zone is actually a safe zone, and banks will not charge flood insurance for that. Anything else?
When you go through the process of removing a home from a flood zone, does it have to go through FEMA, and what is the turnaround?
Okay, that's a great question. So all of these things we are going to cover later in much more detail, but when we go and we remove a house from a flood zone, it has to be done through FEMA. Sometimes, in fact, most of the time, if you call FEMA directly, they will try and get the homeowner or maybe the realtor, insurance agent, the lender to try and do it themselves. What they're really doing is they're basically sidestepping the fact, because it's not an easy process, okay? So a homeowner can try and do it himself and somebody can help him, but eventually after a few months, FEMA will come back and say, okay, now hire a surveyor. So what just happened? You just lost a couple months and you paid them a couple more months worth of flood insurance, okay? You're gonna have to hire a surveyor most of the time to check the structure, fill out the forms, and then submit it. And sometimes homeowners will try and submit them themselves and check the wrong box and get a non-removal. Then they come to me years later and want them to be removed. They've now paid flood insurance for years and years thinking they couldn't have gotten out of it, and they could have gotten out of it if somebody would have helped them and we would have checked the right boxes, okay? So yes, you have to go through FEMA. When you get removed from a flood zone, it becomes public record and it runs with the property, okay? Was there a follow-up question to that? I can't remember. Or did I answer it?
No, I think you answered it.
Okay. Well, for those of you who want to stick on here for just a minute, I can jump over to that screen and show you how to look up properties. Again, I will be doing that on a week from Thursday at the very end of the presentation. But just in case you can't, or if you want to look up your properties between now and then, I would be more than happy to show you how to do that. Is that something we should do, or what do you think?
Yeah, I think that would be great. Also, I think that it could be noted that most of the flood zones are updated in Realist and the tax data too that we have in MLS.
Okay. And so the one thing to remember when you're looking up flood zones is FEMA's flood zones are actually the best zones to go to, because we can actually turn on all the nearby lomas. And again, we haven't really talked about lomas yet. So I just wanted to, I just want you to understand that the FEMA site, we actually can turn on nearby lomas, okay? And when we do that, then we can see if the neighbors have actually gotten out of the flood zone, or if your house is already out of the flood zone too. So hopefully you can all see my Google screen here. And I'm sending you to my site, which is www.floodzonexpert.com. So I send you there first, because sometimes FEMA breaks their sites. In fact, not sometimes, a lot of times. They'll break their sites, and we no longer can get to their site, and then everybody starts bombarding our office with calls. So it's easier to just go to my website, because when FEMA breaks their site and it doesn't come back up and they change it on us, we'll find the new site usually before anybody else, and we'll post it to our website. So if for some reason FEMA breaks their site again and you can't find it, go to my website first, and that's where I wanted you to just see where you find it. You go to my resources page on my website, and the very first choice is click here to check a structure, okay? Or you can go down here and do Google Earth, but we actually really like the check a structure in the ArcGIS. These are both FEMA sites. We prefer the ArcGIS. I'm going to click there, and I'm calling up the site. Now these big boxes come up, and you just want to close those out because you can't really see over the top of them. So we're closing these boxes. Now, one of the things FEMA did, now we know the site loaded correctly because we got all the red boxes, but FEMA screwed everything up. They shut all the LOMAs off. So I'm going to show you real quick how to turn the LOMAs back on. And what that is that's a document that's generated by FEMA, and it removes houses from flood zones, okay? So I want to see how many people have actually been removed from a flood zone in a particular area. Okay, so when you first call up the site, I should have talked you through it. When you first call it up, usually you're only going to see these 3 boxes checked, okay? We want to go to the middle one that says National Flood Hazard Layer. Click on that little diamond right off to the left of the check, and a pull-down menu comes up. Click on LOMAs, okay? So now we just turned on all the LOMAs, all the things that FEMA broke, we just fixed it, okay? Does anybody have an address? I know I can just go to Lansing, Michigan and look at the downtown area because I know there's a lot of people in flood zones, okay? So everywhere you see a purple dot, everywhere, okay? And these purple dots multiply as I zoom into them, by the way, okay? So let's just pick an area. Let's pick this area here. And you see a bunch of purple dots. So we're gonna zoom into this area. And again, this is the Meridian, this is Meridian Township, and I gotta get used to, there we go. So all those purple dots, everywhere I see a purple dot is somebody who got out of a flood zone, okay? And again, we're gonna talk about these flood maps in detail to come, so you're gonna recognize what it is we're looking at here. But for you to check your structure, up in the upper left corner, you're going to want to type in your address, okay? You're going to want to type in 230 South Main Street, for instance, okay? And in Lansing, Michigan. And lo and behold, there is a 230 South Main Street. I was just randomly calling something out, and there it is. And there is no flood zone in that area, okay? So when you check your structures, you're going to want to always type in the address, okay? And see if any blue shows up. Now, here's a bunch of flood zone. Okay, so if when we typed in that address, if it plotted up somewhere up in this area, then yes, we should be concerned because there is flood zone, and you want to look to see if there's flood zone. I'm trying to get in there, flood zone near your structure. Okay, and that's how you look it up. And then the important thing to understand is I turned on all the LOMAs in this area, and for some reason, no LOMAs are showing up. So either people in this area, which is the city of Lansing, have not tried to get out of a flood zone, or maybe they don't know about it, okay? Does anybody have any more questions? Because I think we've run over our time. Yes, no?
Oh, I think we are, looks like we're all set.
All right, well, very good. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you. We'll see you on Thursday.
Sounds perfect. Thanks. Bye for
Thanks.
now.